Okay, so the next thing a newspaper article must have is sources. Now, news sources form both the factual basis, as in what the article's about, and also its evidence as well. So what it uses to prove what has happened and to commentate on it. So it uses quotes, it uses statistics, it uses just factual statements from different people, different groups, different bodies in order to validate the things that's reporting on and to make it appear like it is a valid resource and a valid collection of what's actually happened. Most articles use multiple sources for that reason, is to make it more, is to increase the validity of the argument, or sorry, the article, and to make it really so that the facts that are presented from as many perspectives as possible. And it's one of the things that when you, for instance, have to use additional materials, so if you're using additional materials, whatever purpose it may be, you're doing the exact same thing. You're providing multiple sources and multiple perspectives, and that's what it does. It makes your argument more valid. And it's the same thing with what a newspaper article does. By providing all those different perspectives, it makes the news it's reporting not more genuine or more realistic, but it means that they've represented more sides of the story, more opinions, and that it means that the reader has a better chance of making up their own mind and making an informed decision based on what took place, and can have an informed opinion. That's ultimately what journalism and newspaper articles are trying to do, is trying to give people informed opinions by presenting them the facts of what's happened in one case or another. Journalists generally do not show bias toward one source or the other, and they'll try and represent both sides fairly in most cases. So they will represent each source equally. Yes, okay, one might get one more quote than the other, but that doesn't really matter too much as long as they're both represented fairly and none of what's being said by them is taken out of context. So if they say something that I like boys who behave themselves, and then they just say I like boys, then okay, that has a slight undertone to it that doesn't nearly represent what they said fairly. Okay. News stories are generally judged on the quality and authority of the sources and will quote both sources where possible. So it's one of the things that we judge it on as well. It's not just how journalists judge it themselves, but when you're reviewing, when you're critically analysing a newspaper article, which is what you should be getting in the habit of doing, you'll be looking at the authority of the sources. So actually checking if whoever is saying one thing or the other is actually speaking from a recognised point of view. And how they are quoted, if they're quoted at all. Now, in many cases, this isn't always going to be possible because some people can decline to comment. So, for instance, if you're talking about a criminal case and no one's allowed to speak about it, then a newspaper can say that so-and-so, we did contact them, but they did decline to comment. And that just says that we did try and get both sides of the story, but they were unable or unwilling to comment on it. So that's what that means. So it means that it still is an authority because it is trying to report fairly. It's just not being able to because whoever is involved or whoever they're trying to contact to get their side of the story hasn't come forward with the information. So sources are a really important part of the story, and how they're used and how they're represented often really makes clear how valid or how strong a newspaper article is. And ultimately, people who read a newspaper article or read a certain newspaper will do so because they think that the news articles that they're printing are reliable and they are valid. Alright, so in summary, a news story has the following qualities. First of all, it has a very catchy headline. So something that really jumps out and gets people to keep reading. A short first line, so something that keeps people reading, maintains that interest. It has elaboration, which then continues on with that and gives the rest of the details that we've held within these first two sections. And finally, it uses, or it should use, multiple sources in order for it to be a very strong one. So whether you're using this to write a newspaper article or using this to study one, remember that those are the basic principles of the structure, and they each have a purpose. They have a purpose of getting people to read it. They have a purpose of getting people to continue reading it, and they have a purpose of making what is actually being written valid and believable and true, so that people who read it will get a fair and accurate, shall I say, depiction of the story, that they do so in a fair and balanced way, and they do it where both sides can read the articles themselves and go, yep, that's a fair account of what happened. And it makes news honest, it makes news relevant, and it certainly gives it integrity that makes people also want to read it. So if you read a newspaper article, you also have to make that critical analysis and that critical decision. Is what is being said in this newspaper article really, first of all, is it accurate? Is it fair? How can I tell? You may not even necessarily be asked that. You may be just asked to simply state what's being represented and how is it being represented. And again, these are all principles that you'd use for that. So if it's just about how is it eye-catching, then you will go straight for the headline, for instance. But we'll have a look at that in another video as well. Otherwise, until next time, I will see you later.